Hello. We are going to talk some more about wildfires, California wildfires. And a lot of times, not just with California wildfires, but with a lot of things in science, we see graphs that look like this. And you see this graph, and it has years on the bottom, and then it has, in this case, like number of forest fires, and you have all these lines, these bars, and you see an increasing trend that goes up like that. Well, a lot of times students wonder, where does this information come from? How do we know this stuff? And in some cases, it's direct observations. You know, if it's happened in the last 20, 30 years, we have good records of that. But there's other ways that we can get information about the environment, and especially about the environment of the past. And I'm just going to show you one quick little thing about trees, which you probably already know. Many of you have already learned about tree rings and the fact that tree rings can tell you how old a tree is. And the idea here is, if we look at the close-up, so we're going to take a look at a specific area, this close-up area here, and they show you that there's dark lines and there's these large spaces where it's lighter in color. And this area here that's lighter in color is where you had most of your growth for that year, spring and early summer. And the tree grew and grew and grew. And then this dark line here is the growth that happened at late summer and early fall. So there's not much growth there, less growth than there was in the spring. This whole bar is 1 year's worth of growth. So all you have to do to figure out how old a tree is count up those dark rings. That was the growth at the end of the season, and that's the end of the year. So I count up dark rings, and I know how old the tree is. If there was heavy rains and lots of growth, you see rainy season, you have a really big growth period. During the dry season, it's a much smaller growth period. So there's a smaller growth ring there. Now we're going to see how this helps us in identifying forest fires. You can see one thing on here on this image. It says scar from forest fire, and you can actually see like a scar around part of the tree that burned, only part of it in this particular case, one side. Okay, so what we're going to look at here is an actual section of a tree that's been cut out. And this one, you can see, looks a little bit different than the last diagram that we saw, or many of the trees that you see when we cut them in cross sections to look at the rings. What you have here is you have all these overlapping areas. So you can see this area kind of overlaps, and then you have another overlapping area. Here's what happens. You get a fire, and I'll take this line here. This is 1812. You get that fire, and it burns part of the tree. Well, that part of the tree is now dead. It's not going to grow a full ring around there. And new layers, like this next layer, grow out and try and cover up that scar tissue. And they grow out like this. And they keep growing out, trying to cover up that scar tissue. And then you get a new layer, or a new wildfire, I mean, burning some more of the tree, taking a little bit more away. And those rings the next year again have to grow out. And they create this bubble almost as they try and grow out slowly around that old scar. In this one, 1841, you have another fire. And you see those rings start, those layers try and grow out, covering it. Up here, there's a really drastic one, right? Like if we look at this 1908 one, there was the fire there, and then all of this growth from the tree extended outwards and tries to wrap around. So it tries to wrap around here, covering that scar. So that's a really big example of it. But each time you have one of those little bubbles, that's showing you that there was a wildfire. Okay, let's take a look at the picture again without the writing on it. And what I want to remind you is that we can use this information to tell how often this tree experienced a wildfire. And the way you're doing that is, if you look at this line for 1812, all they did was they counted up rings up to the next fire, in this case 1824. And the number of rings tells you how long it was between one fire and another. And you're going to see more growth for longer periods of time without fires. So from 1841 here to 1859, there was more time, and thus you have more rings and more growth. And you can see that extreme example up here, 1908. And then the next forest fire in this section doesn't come till 1973. So you have all this growth that happened without any kind of scars or forest fires. And that's why it's much bigger, okay? All right, so for two images, which you can find online on Canvas, you are going to identify how many fires there were and how much time there was approximately between each of these fires. And I'll have instructions on the paper and everything, but this is one of the images that you're going to look at, and you'll look at a section and tell me how many fires there were, and try and, as best you can, count up the rings. Now, we can't see all the details, so we're going to do it as close to approximate as we can, counting between fires and fire events. And the other image that you're going to use is this image here. And this image here shows something similar, right? You should be able to identify where on one side where the fires were and how much time between forest fires. All right, let me know if you need any help. Thanks. Bye.